We're out in California on the Recruiting Roadshow, brought to you by Greenhouse, where I'm speaking with some of the world's best recruiting operations professionals and recruiting leaders about the modern problems that are keeping them up at night. I'm out in San Francisco about to talk to my friend Alan Leung, and he runs talent over at Boulevard Recruiting, which is an exciting firm, and I'm really excited about this conversation because Alan's one of those guys I met on the internet who has had my back since day one. Alan is one of those people who is just an amazing bright spot in the world of recruiting. He's built companies like Salesforce and MuleSoft and Quip, and now he's helping early stage startups grow with Annalise Scopazzi at Boulevard. So I'm excited for this conversation and hope you are too. Awesome. Alan, we're out here in San Francisco. You're leading talent at Boulevard. What are you working on these days?
A bunch of stuff. So I partner with a lot of Series A, Series B companies, and it's all over. A lot of tech recruiting, tech hiring for them. We've seen an uptake in go-to-market needs like account executives, partnerships, sales enablement. So it's just a bunch of variety of things between just all technical things and also all go-to-market things for our clients. We've also seen an uptake in health tech demands. So a lot of health tech clients and also prospects have reached out to us for just all their hiring needs. So it's always a really fun puzzle. It's trying to sort out allocation, staffing, who goes where, and when we can onboard like new clients.
Amazing. Now, Annalise Scopazzi founded the firm. Tell me a little bit about how you came in touch with Annalise and how Boulevard came about.
It was actually pretty random. Unfortunately, I had a falling out with BioRender, and this was 3 weeks before our second son was due. And so timing, of course, was really critical. And then I didn't have enough time to really process everything that happened. I knew I needed a job to support the family. And so I was just reaching out back to my connections, my network, and Annalise posted something. I wasn't connected with her at the time. She posted something on LinkedIn and said, "We're seeing an uptake in sales. Which recruiters are available right now?" I'm like, "Hey, that's me." So I just sent her my resume, cold outreach.
Wow.
And said, "Hey, Annalise, I don't know. We're connected. I don't know how I know you, but here's my resume and here's my cover letter. I'm going to have a kid in 4 weeks, so let me see what you got."
That's amazing.
Yeah, and then she put me in touch with her team. I did the interview. It was really quick because they knew I was in a time crunch. The week after our son was born, Rachel, one of the recruiting managers, she called me and said, "We have this engagement, part-time, 20 hours a week. Can you start next week?" I'm like, "Sure, I can do that." So one thing led to another. I was an IC recruiter, just building out AbiCare for them, one of the clients in the health tech space. When I joined, they were a Series A startup, and one thing led to another. 20 hours became 30 hours, 30 hours became 40 hours, and then they made me full-time, and now I'm one of the recruiting managers leading a team.
Wow. That's such a great story. And it's something that I've heard consistently about Annalise and the team at Boulevard, where they're bringing a new business model to recruiting. Talk a little bit about that. My understanding is that some recruiters work fractionally or they work embedded at specific tech companies. How are you modeling this workplace culture that really seems to balance what modern parents are looking for?
I think the cool thing about our model is it's fractional embedded, right? So depending on the person's lifestyle, their availability, some of our recruiters actually go to school part-time. They don't know if recruiting is going to be a full-time thing for them. So this type of model offers them a balance between both worlds, right? Recruiting, which is something that they're really used to, but also maybe something that can hone in on their craft outside of recruiting. So we do increments of 10 recruiter hours that we offer to clients, all the way up to 40 hours for one person. We don't believe in people working overtime, and it's all billable hours, right? So we don't charge a placement fee or anything or a success fee. Everything is billed monthly. So the clients know exactly whatever hours they sign up and commit to for that month, they know exactly what the invoice looks at the end of the month. It's really cool because me as a father of two, it gives me that balance. I mentioned I started off with just 20 hours a week because the other time I'm taking care of the newborn, right? And just making sure my wife is also okay. And then as we gradually found childcare, I'm able to increase those hours accordingly, right? 30 hours became 40 hours and so on and so forth. So it does give you that flexibility.
There's something about the work of recruiting itself, raising a rec, running that intake with the hiring manager, getting those first round of sourcing outreach messages out to a group of candidates, starting the phone screens, getting the submits to the hiring manager, getting the feedback. I live and breathe for like the funnel and the process. And the beauty of, I think, tech startup hiring is that there's nowhere to hide. There's no exponential leveling of manager, director, VP,
Mhm.
C-suite for recruiting. The recruiters that I see in early stage companies where you're focusing on just love the crafts.
Mhm.
How do you think about the craft of recruiting?
Well, I think the craft of recruiting is you always have to fine tune it, right? It's always changing. How I used to recruit 15 years ago is very different than how we recruit now, right? So it's a constant evolution of complementing your skills, but also making sure you know what type of tools you need to use, right? Knowing how to recruit and knowing how to really like hone in on your craft, depending on like what's available out there and how the landscape is changing. You always have to be constantly like thinking about how to improve yourself. What are other people doing? How are their success doing, right? Reach out to them and figure out how come they're successful? What are they seeing? Comp packages are also different too, right? Understanding how comp philosophy works, understanding how equity works. I think those things are really important so that you can really close a candidate at the late stage. But also making sure candidate experience in this age of like AI, right? There's a lot of noise out there, a lot of things you can automate. So making sure you still remind yourself to put in like a human first approach towards recruiting and never leave that. Because at the end of the day, recruiting is people, right? And you're hiring people, not machines. So I think it's really important to still have a level of like humanness to recruiting. So I think that's how you continue to stay relevant in the space and also making sure that those things don't go unnoticed.
And I think when you mention a contemporary tech stack for recruiters, it's still really important to be able to balance the art and the science. The science of recruiting being the tools and softwares, but also the hiring methodology. And sometimes we think about the assessment. Psychometrics are actually starting to make kind of a comeback. We see like the ebbs and flows of people's public perception of psychometrics. But when it comes to the arts, I think it's the conversation, the unlocking of human motivation, knowing what drives people, knowing how, if they join that company, will they be fulfilled? And that's the stuff to me that gets me so excited is, yes, let's balance the art and the science, but let's talk to people, let's connect, let's find out what motivates them, their story. You said hiring has changed since what worked 10, 15 years ago. You've built the talent machine at some incredible companies. What's the difference between the work you're doing now versus the work that you did maybe at Salesforce in those early days?
When I joined Salesforce, it was about 8,000. Now I think they're like at 60,000. And that's just a volume machine. It's people applying, you're managing referrals. And so it's really just like getting candidates to the finishing line as quickly as possible, the most efficient way possible. What I'm doing now, I think I'm trying to pair up recruiters that have a really good rapport, that I know can have a good rapport with the founding team. I think that's really important. And it's hard to tell from like someone's resume or job description. You sort of have to meet the founders in person, and also work with them to understand the quirks and the nuances that they operate in, and then pair them up with the recruiter that you onboard carefully, right? The tones have to match, the dynamic has to match, the pace has to match. Then there's like good synergy around, and that onboarding could be smooth. Sometimes you don't get it right. Sometimes we fail and we got to discount really quickly, right? But these things are like what I think about and what I process when I'm looking at recruiters onboarding at Boulevard and making sure they're placed at the right client site. Because if it doesn't go well, then it's, our brand on the line, is my name on the line too, right?
What do you think some of those traits are for recruiters that are successful in this model that Boulevard is leading?
I think the ability to like be able to adapt really quickly. We work remotely, right? So it's hard to really understand tone, body language, those sort of things that you just can't really vet a founder for, right? Until you actually get to work with them. I think the first kickoff meeting all the way to like looking at the calibration docs and then developing the sequence, the first 3 weeks is very telling. You have to kind of match the pace, the style, right, of the founding team in order to like build rapport really quickly. So that's what I really look for. And then I give coaching, I give feedback to recruiters that are onboarded to make sure that they understand, they capture some of these signals early on and adjust quickly, right? Because it's harder to adjust when you're in week 5 or week 6 of the partnership. It's easier to make those iterations earlier on, and then you can kind of fix it on the spot. Another thing I look for is the ability to kind of like understand the profile that the founding team is looking for quickly, right? So if they want X, Y, Z, and you bring them A, B, C, and you continue to bring them all that, then it's not going to work out. But able to like really tease apart some of the requirements and specs that they're looking for, and then understand how to go after it. But also maybe even like test the waters out and say, okay, I brought A and B. I know you're looking for X, Y, but here's like a Z that came into the play. Like, what do you think about that? Just starting to be a trusted advisor and like just testing out the water and like letting the founding team know, hey, some of these candidates don't exist, but I found you 2/3 of what you're looking for. How do you feel, right? So it's getting those moments correctly and quickly is what I really look for, especially on a partnership when we're starting to take off really early.
What's the feedback you're getting from the recruiters at Boulevard? Are they having a good time? Are they working with great clients? And do they enjoy this model of working?
Actually, a lot of them I used to work with before.
Nice.
From my MuleSoft days, Slack days, Quip days, Salesforce days. So it's nice to see them operate in a very different capacity alongside with me. They like what they do and they have fun doing it. So, there are moments where, there's going to be pain. There's going to be a lot of moments of frustration. I'm there with them, right? We process it together. And I think having that level of trust already established gives them the opportunity to be a little bit more vulnerable earlier on, right, with me and really candid about the feedback that they're experiencing. So it's been great. It's been great so far.
When I think about the kickoff and working with a new client, there's not a lot of time for rapport building, socializing. If you onboard a new client, if I onboard a new client, I'm thinking, okay, week one, we're calibrating, we're running a great intake, we're taking information from that like sales call,
Yeah.
bringing it into the document that we're going to use as our source of truth, getting those profiles calibrated. And then the way I think of it is like, okay, I've got like 2 weeks to build a pipeline from 0 to 1, cold outreach. By the end of week one, I want my outreach sequences like already humming so that, by week 3, the hiring manager's got a full interview calendar and we've reverse engineered the pipeline based on pass-through metrics. How are you thinking about building pipelines for companies? And am I thinking about things in the right way that is a little bit different perhaps from maybe an in-house recruiter that does have more inbound applicants to consider?
What I usually do is even before the kickoff, I try to encourage the team to bring 5 to 10 sample profiles of based on what I know about the company so far. So like we do a lot of preliminary research, whether it be company, whether it be the founding background, whether it be mutual connections, right? We try to do all this like research before we go live on day one so that we come prepared with at least 10 sample profiles. We run through the typical kickoff, doc where we ask questions around the specs. Can you sacrifice this for this, right? Those sort of things. But I like to leave at least 10 minutes of time in that kickoff to really go through the sample profiles. I think that's really important because what oftentimes you see is what they say the first 30 minutes of the kickoff and what they say about a candidate I bring on is not alignment.
Yeah.
Or they're a little bit more optimistic about certain candidates that weren't really discussed in the kickoff, right? So you got to balance out both like the job kickoff and also the candidate calibration, the sample profiles to really understand like what they're really looking for. So we do that. First week is, we after the kickoff, 24 hours, 28, if I want to say 24 to 48 hours, we come back with a more calibrated candidate doc. And we're right there, we're already in parallel, writing out the sequence, sending out the messages once approved, right? And then seeing what the response rate shows. We set the expectations that most candidates don't respond back until the second or third or even the fourth. I think the fourth reach out. So it's going to take some time for it to mature and for the candidates to come back. Then we kind of see the first batch of candidates at the recruiter screen, what type of reaction we get, right? Based on what you're telling me from week one, these are the candidates that responded. Like, what do you think, hiring manager, right? And then we adjust from there. So I think building pipeline is a constant evolution, it's constant iteration. You can't always depend on inbound. Yeah, inbound, sometimes you get some good traction, but mostly you try to get candidates from all different avenues, whether it be inbound, referrals, VC network, outbound, previous silver medalists, right, from candidates that you've worked with in the past, like those sort of things. I think it's a holistic picture of how you tackle the pipeline.
Yeah, I think about the difference between outbound sourcing versus inbound processing. And like even inbound processing, if you have a strong employer brand, raise a rec, market it in the right ways, you're optimizing for what could be like a 0.5 to maybe 2% conversion rate at the very top of funnel.
Yeah, if you're lucky, 2%.
Exactly. Whereas if you're going to spend time working with the founder, working with the hiring manager, going through a thoughtful intake, running those calibration of sample profiles, and then going to market and looking at a talent map of folks in the area, you could turn around after, a 4-sequence drip campaign, and in 7 to 10 days, you could have, 20 folks ready to roll based on the volume of outreach. How do you think about the value of outbound sourcing today with the recruiters you bring on into Boulevard?
Oh yeah, outbound sourcing is number one, I think. you have to, I think, relying on purely on inbound with those conversion rates, 2% is actually pretty good, is very not likely. So I think a lot of the recruiters that we vet for, they have done outbound sourcing in the past. They know how to do it. They know what works and what hasn't. They're looking at conversion rates, interested, reply, and then how do those convert into recruiter screens? Is there a drop off there, right? And then always constantly thinking about testing the language in the campaign, but also making sure they're making edits in the messages to reflect company updates, right? So if a new head of product joins, right, incorporating that and blasting out to people that haven't reached out, that haven't opened or haven't responded, and letting them know that a head of product want to join, maybe now is the best time. So it's a constant cycle that they have to keep on remembering to send out outbound outreaches to. Just because a candidate doesn't respond to you today doesn't mean they're not going to respond to you later on, right? It's the timing is everything too. So I think I put a lot of emphasis and value on outbound reaches, and also making sure that the people that didn't respond, right, looking into it and saying, oh, maybe this was the wrong email address. Let's try a different email address 6 months from now, right, or X months from now. So it's a constant refreshing of the list that you need to do.
Totally. When I think about recruiters who have this thirst for outbound sourcing, they are just like the gritty recruiters to me. What do you think some of the differences are between recruiting in a big tech company versus being an external partner to an early stage startup?
Well, recruiting in a really big company, you're sort of just idling. I don't know if that's the right word. You don't have to think much about the brand. You don't have to think much about the sell. Bigger companies, I mean, like Salesforce Tower is just right there, right? So they have all this marketing tool. Everyone knows them. They're internationally known. So you don't have to worry about the extra chase to sell a candidate that will really resonate with the founding team because of the mission fit, because of the product, or et cetera, but because of the career path. But I think for bigger tech company, it's more about selling like work-life balance, selling more about like benefits, stability, those sort of things, right? And not to say that it's wrong, it's just different, right? It's just different. Versus in a early stage company, you're constantly telling candidates what's changed, right? The team is now X, before it was Y, right? You're constantly updating them on revenue numbers, right? Last year we hit 10 million MRR and we're on pace to hitting, 20 million ARR, right? These type of like financials, these type of metrics are always important. And it's a very different conversation and approach when you're talking to candidates for an early stage companies, because these financials, these metrics, these type of numbers don't get highlighted, right? I would say in like a branding doc or anything. So it's really important to capture these moments with candidates so they understand where the path is and if they're on for the ride, right? I think that's really important.
How important do you think compensation and equity is for earlier stage company candidates that you're outreaching?
I mean, living in SF, I think compensation is pretty important, right? People need to make a certain amount just to like live here. You see this in candidates that have had successful exits, right? Myself included, MuleSoft, right? People have exits with like Stripe, Uber, et cetera. They get it, right? So if you're selling a startup to candidates that have had successful exits or have had those milestones, oftentimes they kind of understand that they're going to come in with a lower base than, most of their big tech friends, but a higher upside in equity and more ownership of equity, right? It's not as diluted as like a Series F company, right? Now, if you're selling it to a candidate that haven't been in that type of environment before, who haven't seen a successful exit or it's their first startup, you have to really double down on like your story and your experience of working at a startup previously and what that could end up looking like for them should there be a really cool milestone or cool event. So I think you got to really educate them, not just one time, but throughout the entire cycle. And then some maybe afterwards too. So I think it's very different. Yeah, I think you got to sell also the founding team too, like why you believe in the founding team, right? Their background and place bets on people that have done it before. I think that's really important to like sell and to get right away for candidates. And if they don't get it right away, offer up time for the VC or offer up time for the founding team for them to speak to them.
That's cool. I love the idea of bringing in the founding team, even bringing in somebody on the cap table, like an investor to sell it. That is, to me, the craft. That's the art. I think there's a level of like whining and dining candidates in startups that can be kind of fun.
Yeah.
When you think about taking a bet on somebody, do you think folks coming from big tech can be successful in early stage startups?
I did it. I think, yes, it's rare. It's definitely a personality thing. And also, it speaks to the grit of the person because you have to have a lot of grit coming from big tech all the way to like a scrappy startup because you're not going to have all the resources available, right? There's not going to be all these other teams that you can rely on. You can just pass your work off to, right? you're it. You're it. You gotta do everything, right? Full cycle and then some, right? So I think the chances of that happening is like low, but it's doable for sure. I've seen it happen. A lot of people from Facebook, a lot of people from eBay went to like a firm, right? Those sort of like scenarios. It's happened before, and it can be repeated again. But it's hard to find.
I think it's important to index on the individual that's right in front of you. Sometimes I hear from recruiters that, perhaps big tech folks can't be successful in a startup. And I kind of reject that because at the end of the day, we're unlocking an individual's motivation to do the job at hand. And to make a blanket assumption like that is just fundamentally wrong when I think about
Yeah.
my training as a recruiter, particularly as we consider things like bias and inclusion.
Yeah.
Like we try to avoid like blanket statements at all costs.
Yeah.
Yet that one seems to be pervasive, particularly in content online. And maybe it's just coming from a certain audience that is in my algorithmic feedback loop. But I'm really glad to hear you say that because that's your experience. And you could have gone on to be, director, VP, follow that like large company path. What is it about doing what you're doing today that lights you up and to stay in this industry after these years?
I think autonomy. Basically, I get to do a lot. Of course, I've got to run a lot of things by Annalie, but I know that I have her full trust in speaking my mind. And if something doesn't feel right, or if I think that there's a process that could be improved, or an avenue of additional revenue that we can like tap into, let's go and explore it together, right? There's not a whole lot of red tape. I don't have to dance around the bureaucracy of everything, right? I can just ship in and go and see what happens, right? And let the numbers speak for itself in terms of testing to see if it's worthwhile. So I think autonomy is number one. I think being able to build and just be scrappy with it, right? We don't need fancy tools. And the cool thing about like Boulevard Recruiting is like we try to get as much done without using a lot of these flashy tools because it eats away at our margins, right?
Totally.
So we have to be really thoughtful about adding a CRM or like an ATS internally for us to track applicants, for example, right? Maybe can we get away with spreadsheets? That means I have to up-level my scripting skills, right? That means I gotta up-level my VLOOKUPs, right? So let's do it, right? Let's up-level everyone else so that we can think about how do we continue to increase our margins of the company, right? So we get to have these type of conversations at the level that I am versus if I was at a big tech, like just buy that tool,
Now, are you running tech implementations at some of the startups you work at? Do you make ATS recommendations? Do you build out any of those tech stacks for clients?
We're starting to play around with the idea of it. We don't know if it's a service that we'll put on our contract to sell. But the cool thing, like I said, right, we can explore it. We can experiment with it. Do we have the right team to do something like that? So we're starting with one client. I can't disclose, but trying to see how far we can go with this tech implementation, TA ops type work, and then learn from it, come back as a group, regroup, and think about if we were to take this off, what type of individuals do we need to bring on to really scale this, right? So the cool thing is like we can do these type of internal experimentation and see if we can build out a service or a function to do this, right? Which is pretty cool.
Okay, Alan, you've talked a little bit about like grit for early stage recruiters, and you've talked a little bit about the business model of Boulevard at this like hourly billing threshold. How do you balance the quality and speed dynamic that clients are looking for? Because if you have a recruiter that's working maybe 10 or 20 hours
Mm.
per week, that's not the typical recruiter that's at every like beck and call from a hiring manager or a founder if they worked in-house. I think a lot of recruiters that work in early stage startups in-house, they work around the clock. They're talking to candidates after hours. They're getting late night Slack pings. They're getting late night reschedules for interviews the next morning. How do you balance that in what seems to be a different type of model?
Yeah. So we actually, when I'm in the sales call with prospects, right? I set the expectation that for this particular role, we will at least a minimum of 20 hours for a recruiter to successfully have a placement, ideally by X day, right? And try to forecast that out. I let them know that they're only working about 4 hours a day, right? So you can expect X number of reach outs per week, which equates to depending on your conversion rates. Maybe a recruiter screen, like X number of recruiter screens. So I do this math for them already in these early sales calls. They're not even a client yet, but just setting the expectation right, day zero, right? I think is very important. And then sometimes like you have to balance out the number of outreaches, but at the same time, you also have to balance out the quality, right? So just because, you want, 20 engineers, which if you do the math, right? probably 3,000 reach outs, 4,000 reach outs. And if that's what they're trying to solve for and that's what they want, then our model is not set up for that. And we part ways.
Yeah.
And that's okay, right? Because every company looks at hiring differently, right? But if some founders are like, yeah, I don't want 3,000 messages. I want like quality more. Then let's have a conversation and like, let's figure out how to get those 20 hires for you. Maybe not today, but like maybe we can build a team around it later on when capacity frees up, right? Then it becomes more of a longer term staffing conversation rather than a short term blitz, right? So every model is different. Every company is different. I have these conversations every day with founders. And so it depends on what they prioritize.
I think one of the things I've learned in recruiting after a decade is how many different business models there are. And when you work with early stage companies, oftentimes they are earlier career individuals that don't have a ton of exposure to the economics of recruiting as an industry, as a business model. What do you think the math is that they're doing when they talk to, say, you in an intake versus a traditional agency that may be looking to sell like an exclusive contingent 25% bill rate against first year salary versus your model?
I think they always look at ROI, right? What is the cost per hire? And I always encourage everyone to do that. I mean, of course, because you have to, at the end of the day, you run a business. You have to know who is being more efficient with their deliverables and the output versus not, right? And who is more expensive. I think for our model, the cool thing is like we operate inside your ATS. And so all the work that we put in, all the templates that we put in, they're yours to keep. In a contingent model where it's an agency, that property or the intellectual property or the ownership of candidates may not be yours. They're also submitting candidates to multiple different clients. Whereas if we sign on with you, you are like, we represent you and we don't submit those candidates that we vet for other clients. So it's one-to-one unless you give us the blessing that, hey, this probably not doesn't make sense for this candidate, go ahead and submit to your clients.
Got it.
But we won't submit a candidate to multiple clients of ours. So it offers a little bit more of an intimate relationship with the candidate. And the cool thing at the end of the day, should we part ways, you get all the things that we built for you, which is very different. So upfront cost may be more for us because you're paying monthly versus, at the end where an agency, you have to pay 25 to 30%. But the cool thing is like we set up so much in terms of systems, instead of process, instead of templates, all this for you that there's a lot more value on the operation side that we put effort in as well.
I think that's why traditional contingent gets a little bit of a bad rap because you can scenario plan and founders are smart and like basically the breakage around getting that bill rate is oftentimes like, does that candidate exist in your ATS? And what is the timestamp from when the candidate was submitted for who gets paid versus the quality and the long-term relationship? So when I hear you say that Boulevard embeds Recruiter in to the company's ATS, it's assuming they have an ATS. You're working with early stage companies, Series B and earlier. I think of, the tech stacks that those types of companies use, probably Ashby, Greenhouse, maybe Lever. Mid-market companies are probably in like iSIMS, Smart Recruiters, Workday.
Yeah.
Is that something you look at the skill set for recruiters when you match them with a client, if they have specific experience with a certain ATS? Or do you think these tools are easy enough to learn for a great recruiter that works with you?
With the exception of Workday, all these tools are easy to learn. I've used Workday before. I've used Lever, Greenhouse, Workday, Bullhorn. A capable recruiter is able to pick up any ATS because they're all much less the same. There's some UI specs, some tweaks here and there. How to build a report. I think the reporting capability is very different between ATSs. But other than that, managing a pipeline, managing sourcing, managing candidates, more or less the same.
You talked about your departure from a company. I've experienced layoffs in the recruiting space. I think I navigated maybe 2 or 3 in like my decision-making process, reading the writing on the wall, getting a read on like the funding stage and like all of that. But going through a layoff is challenging. I went through one as well with a newborn. And when I think about the silver lining in all of that, I see recruiters with tremendous resilience. And the recruiters that I know that have that, 4 to 8 year experience, Mark, they've had a lot of at-bats. And the strong ones, the resilient ones, the lucky ones that have gone through multiple companies in that time, they're learning different systems. So the benefit is that, hey, you may have worked with 3 different ATSs in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
You may have gone through an RFP process or been responsible for implementing a new tool, which is something that not every recruiter gets to do if they are one of 10, one of 100, one of 1,000 recruiters that maybe worked at the same company for 4 or 5 years. Now, when you think about the reporting and the metrics, what are some of those metrics that you think are important for recruiters to focus on in 2026?
I think when we first kick off the search, like weeks 1 to week 3, it's always what are the goals that a recruiter is going to do based on the hours that they're committed to the client in terms of number of unique outreaches sent. So net new outreaches, and then how do those convert? What are the conversion rates, right? We try to typically yield between 5 to 10% convert back to a recruiter screen from a cold outreach. So if we're falling short, let's A/B test it really quickly with a different language, maybe something a little bit more playful, not as formal, maybe more formal, not playful, right? We just test all these things to see what resonates well. Maybe incorporate a GIF in there or a picture in there, anything that would drive up engagement. So the first weeks 1 to week 3, I look for that. And then when the pipeline becomes a little bit more mature, look for the holistic funnel, right? Recruiter screen, hiring manager screen, maybe some sort of assessment, and then on-site. Where are the drop-off rates, right? Why are we dropping off? Are we doubling down on that? Are candidates withdrawing because a broken calendar link? I don't know. Or is it landing in someone's spam, right? Seeing we can fix something that's like very easy so that we can continue to improve the pass-through rates. If it's because there's a hard interview and they keep saying no, let's figure out why this interview is being so hard, right? So there are multiple scenarios that happen with the pipeline that we can diagnose and troubleshoot. And then ultimately, the time it took, the number of qualified candidates to hire. I think that's really important. And what I mean by qualified candidates, usually when the candidates make it to the mid stage, like a tech coding screen or some sort of assessment, because at that time, it should be very telling once a candidate reaches to that stage. You should have, it's a pretty good predictor of hire, right? So if you're doing 10 to 1, 10 people that went to coding and to one hire, there's something wrong with the on-site stage, or there's something wrong with the offer stage, right? Something's not clicking because obviously there are usually pre-filled 3 or 2 filters already before the middle stage round. I like to anchor on that. Now, if you're doing 4 qualified candidates to 1 hire, okay, I think that we're moving in the right direction. So I also don't forget, I remind myself not to forget the number of qualified candidates to 1 offer or 1 hire stage. I think that's also really important too, because then you can kind of shift things around, shift questions around, right? If there's a question that most candidates are not getting right in the on-site stage, and that's why the reason why they're failing, is bring it up earlier in the process and see where it goes, right? So you can filter out candidates and not waste the team's time.
I love hearing about the different metrics you index on at various stages of the funnel. Let's go back to the top of the funnel and get a little nerdy. So you talk about making sure it doesn't go to somebody's spam folder, that initial outreach message. When you think about initial outreach messaging hitting a primary inbox, you embed a recruiter in. Do they get new email? So it's Brandon at whatever company, and they're launching a brand new email domain? Or are you sending on behalf of campaigns for the founder or the hiring manager so that you do hit primary inbox?
Yeah, both. We have 2 sequences running.
Okay.
So we test a recruiter only version and then a multi-sender version and see what works.
Nice.
Because it's not about who's right or wrong, it's about what's best for the company, right?
Yeah.
If recruiter only sequence is landing better, and we've seen this happen, let's stick to it, right? No offense to the founding team, that's fine, right? And vice versa. If the multi-sender sequence works, let's stick to it, right? What I mean by going into the spam folder is you can kind of see in the sequences that they haven't been opened or they haven't been replied or haven't been tracked. Then you can kind of make general assumptions that maybe this person is not receiving and opening my emails because it's spam or it's the wrong email address, right? If you're clearly Brandon Jeff and I'm sending it to Aaron Barnes or something, that's the wrong email. Let's change that, right? This person's not responding because this is not Brandon Jeff.
Yeah.
Right. So just don't assume that when you're sending an outreach, it's going to land perfectly well to that candidate, right? So really double clicking in on why the sequences are not landing properly and then troubleshooting from there.
Are you doing email, in-mails, phone calls, SMS? What is the sequence look like for you?
Yeah, I do SMS only on candidates that I've previously hired, I've hired or I've worked with before. I think it goes a long way, and also reduces the chances of fraud. We usually do emails first. Cold calling, hit or miss. Sometimes it's hard to find someone's phone and then picking up in the middle of the day, and then email that and email last.
I feel like it's always this kind of ping pong between trends of email is working versus in-mail is working. and we go back and forth. So it's great to hear that you're focused on both and having like a multi-channel campaign go out. These are some of like the recruiting operations, rec ops ideas that I think about for how it impacts sourcing, email deliverability, conversion rates, data storytelling. How do you think about rec ops and communicating data back to your stakeholders? Do you have like dashboards? Do you have like tableaus that you're sending off to founders? How do you tell the story of the great recruiting work you're doing?
I wish we had Tableau. I mean, that's that's a big software. So week on Mondays or the first like business day, today, everyone on the team sent out like weekly status updates to their clients. So in a form of like pipeline reports. So our clients always expect that on the beginning of the week. At the first working Monday or first working day of the month, we actually do a look back on the previous month about all the progress we've made. And there you can kind of see snapshots of like the report and the metrics I just kind of told you about, and where we see trends. Like if we see a bunch of deltas, a bunch of people falling out of the coding screen, we'll highlight that and kind of address it and see how we can problem solve it in our next like weekly sync. And then at the end of that report, we would then do a look ahead of around goals that we want to achieve for the following month. When we complete a search, I always recommend doing a retro. Some clients don't need it, and we always ask for it. We always ask them to do it. But a retro basically means like a look back as to like when we first kicked it off, all the learnings, all the findings, the number of like interview hours that like a CEO did, like those sort of things that we really want to talk about, and just a high level summary of like how it went down, right? And then what are some learnings should you engage us again on a similar search, and where we can improve right away when we get going. So these retros are like really important for us to kind of really collaborate together and let's understand like, oh wow, it took this long, or it was really quick, right, to do all this. And it gives us a really good sense for a future potential partnership around like, if we were to kick off a new role again, here's what's going to take. Do you have the capacity to do that?
I love that you called that out. We talk a lot about like recruiters up-leveling from like order taker or administrative role to strategic thought partner, talent advisor. That's what it takes, is running really strong processes and being able to communicate back what the wins were, what the deficits were, not over-promising and under-delivering. I think a lot of recruiters, when they perhaps launch a rec, they're under a lot of pressure to fill a pipeline, to hit that time to fill goal, whether it's 30 days, 45 days, 60 days. But being able to measure expectations and communicate upfront, like, hey, we are launching this search. I know you wanted this person hired yesterday, and in your mind, you'd love to interview next week because you're paying for a service, but the sequence is on a 4-stage, 2-day drip. So that means we're not going to have candidates until potentially next week.
Exactly, yeah.
I see a lot of recruiters moving away from this like white glove service and more to, hey, I'm your partner in this process. And retrospectives are such a great way to communicate those expectations. I think about that being the strategic value that Boulevard is like leaving with the client. So not only do they have all the historic data and the candidates within their ATS, but they also have the insight. And I think it's really important that founders, hiring managers get those insights the way they receive insights from other areas of the business. We were talking about this in the pre-show, how recruiting tech is not always the most preferred technology in a hiring manager's stack. They may have 10 to 15 different tools they log into on a daily basis. And, HR, I'm sorry, like that's going to be bottom of the stack in terms of their priorities. So being able to surface the information that's sitting in their database for them, because all of those founders, all those hiring managers, what do they say? Hiring is their number one priority. So how can we help empower that and enable them to have great hiring processes?
And the cool thing is once we build these reports, these retro presentations, should a new head of product, a new head of engineering, a new leader joins, they have all this data we can reference with them and say, hey, like when we kicked off the search before you got here, this is how long it took. So just setting expectations properly that if we were to help you hire, like we might have to try out some different techniques, or the results might be the same, right? But at least there's something that they can anchor on and they can look back and reference as a way to like start off, so that expectations are set, everyone's fully aligned around like deliverables and output, and what the weeks over weeks look like in terms of productivity.
When I think about rec ops, one of the big areas right now that's getting a lot of attention is like scheduling. There's a lot of ways to just like schedule and get somebody into a conversation. Or in tech, we like to talk about first principles thinking. At the end of the day, the first principles thinking of recruiting is getting to a handshake, yes. It's interesting to think that the phone or a Zoom call is such a critical component of the hiring process, yet it's still really challenging. We don't yet have artificial intelligence that manages our personal calendars. We're not talking into a little device that's managing our day, telling us where to be. We're still looking things up. We're still dialing the phone.
Yeah.
We're still joining a Zoom call. So it's exciting to talk about all of the use cases for AI. But I always go back to first principles thinking in recruiting that at the end of the day, until consumer tech catches up with where we want AI to be, we're still operating very much in a recruiting process that has largely been dependent upon the phone itself. And the phone can be Zoom as a proxy for the phone. How are you seeing folks interview people? Is it Calendly links to get into a Zoom call for a remote interview? Is it scheduling in person where you then have an office manager as the third party that's going to meet a candidate on site and let them into a building? I'm just thinking about like what my experience has been like coming to SF and checking into different building spaces. Like there's a lot of logistics that go into this.
Yeah. Good question. So we actually, I can't disclose this, but we have a client that's working on solving this.
Cool.
That we're very excited about. This founder have been in the scheduling space for quite some time. And so they're trying to help this problem, actually.
So for the candidates you're hiring, how are you getting them into calls with hiring managers? Are you using like Slack? Are you getting them into remote calls? How do you communicate with both the candidates and the hiring managers to get those high priority folks in as fast as you can so you don't lose them?
So they have an internal agent as like an assistant that schedules for them and automatically sends them the Zoom link. Yeah.
Awesome.
So we don't have much say in terms of the proprietary tools our client uses because in our contract, we have to use their tech stack. And so whatever they already have, we tackle on. So whether it be Zoom, whether it be Hangout, whether it be Teams, right? We just have to like use it. For the on-site question, we usually, since we're remote, if the account manager like myself is in that city that the candidate is going on to site, we try our best to help with the on-site logistics. So like there's a client right around the corner from me. So sometimes when one of my recruiters have a candidate on site, and the recruiter is not in San Francisco, I would actually personally come here and try to meet this candidate and hopefully like clean up their conference rooms and make sure there's a space there for them. Because sometimes the founders don't think about that. They don't think about lunch breaks. They don't think about bathroom breaks.
Yeah.
So I have to remind them, hey, like make sure you get them some snacks, make sure the conference room is clean, make sure people don't go over the conference rooms. So I'm there on site with them to give them that assistance. I can't do that all the time, right? So we try our best to just like remind them ahead of time to make sure that there's someone that's going to be there, whether it be an office person, whether it be, it usually falls on the founders to do that themselves or someone in like the product ops space or something. We do our best to try to like make sure the on-site goes smoothly as possible, given the constraints of us working remotely. Most of the time, I would say that there are no hiccups with the exception of like not enough rooms. So they have to like kick someone out. But more often than not, like when we check in with candidates, they all have a pretty good time.
I feel like that's one of those like gritty pieces of startup candidates too, whereas like if you're hiring in startups, like candidates just, they index on different things depending on the types of backgrounds that they have for the companies they work for. And I feel like startup folks, like they roll with that stuff. If like the conference room is going over, like they get it. If they're like stuck in the lobby or they can't get in the building, I feel like they just like let stuff roll. But when I think about these stories of my experiences working with early stage founders, one of the things I always go back to in that intake is like assessing if I think that company is ready to hire. How do you think a founder demonstrates that they're ready to hire?
Well, I asked them actually in the sales, even before they're a client. I asked them like, what have you done with hiring so far? Like, tell me about your approach so far. And then kind of see where they're, how they respond to that question. It's like, oh, we just more partner with multiple different clients or multiple different agencies and firms and kind of see what works and what sticks. And if that's the only approach that they've done, then yeah, there's some education that needs to be done there, right? But you can kind of also tell that you look up the founder team, and if they are experienced hiring managers, they don't necessarily need to be a second-time founder or third-time founder, but if they've worked with at companies before where they've demonstrated the ability to like scale that team, whether it be at Notion, whether it be at Stripe or Dropbox or Airbnb, right? Then they kind of understand how to hire, like, and especially at a fast growth company. So these are some of the signals that I kind of look for preemptively when taking some of these calls. And also I ask them the question, like, how do you think you're going to get to 20 engineer hires? Are you thinking about like just blissing 3,000 reach outs and call it a day? Or are you thinking about this more longer term and adding more recruiting support as you go along, right? Do you think just outreaches is just going to do it, right? So kind of like don't take it at face value. I would say just like asking them more questions about what's been done so far, where they're thinking about hiring, checking out their experiences. I think those type of like research that I do would then help me prepare and understand if they're ready to hire or not.
What's the biggest mistake you see recruiters make when they go out on their own or they go into an agency versus working in-house?
Thinking that it's easy, because it's not easy. I think some agencies, they really market the get rich quick scheme.
Yeah.
It's not about that sometimes, right? Like, I get money is important, but if they're only dangling that carrot in front of you and you can make, $500,000 with like in 6 months, right? You've seen those ads, right, before. So I think there's recruiters that fall victim into that and thinking that they can do it really quickly and thinking that they can do it easily. I don't think it's the case. I think that's one mistake, I think, for an agency that really just dangles that type of like model in front of you. Ones that start off on their own as an RPO, I think the mistake that they make when they're starting on their own thinking that they're going to get clients right away. They might, based on the referrals, but continuing to expand their client list is tough, because you have to really deliver on excellence, deliver on your work, deliver on your quality, and like kind of your work speaks for itself. And it's tough, it's tough to obtain a list of customers that you like working with and also expanding that later on. So I think those are two things that come top of mind for me.
I think Annalie told me once that majority of clients are coming inbound or referral versus like a outbound sales motion selling Boulevard to people. Is that still the case? And like, if so, A, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But B, like, how do you do that? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, honestly, Annalie did all that. I'm just here, just like continuing that and making sure I don't disrupt it. It speaks to her credibility. It speaks to her network. It speaks to her early days of Palantir, Notion, Figma, right? And it also speaks to like her ability to command excellence, right? Because at the end of the day, like people just want to work with really great people, right? And if we're able to deliver on our quality, if we own up to our mistakes early by admitting fault, discounting, right? How we show up, how we make mistakes, but also how we show up when we win speaks volume, right? And I think that carries a lot of weight on her. And I think a lot of founders kind of recognize that. And the community here is small, right? Word gets out and then one thing leads to another and you have all this people knocking on your door wanting to work for you, right? Unfortunately, we can't work with every client. I want to work with every client, but we got to turn away most and onboard. And the thing is, like, we don't chase after a client list. I would say we are very meticulous about like who we place. Like back to when we first kicked off this interview, I'm very mindful about who I place with a client. Like the vibes, the dynamic, the personas, the pace, everything, right? Has to match with, match accordingly with the founder, right? And if something's not right or anything, like then it's not going to go well for us. So when I'm doing staffing allocation, I think about all these different types of traits that a recruiter has, a founder has, and try to like play that matchmaking game in order to have a successful like onboarding experience for the clients. So I don't just onboard just to kick the revenue. We actually turn away potential revenue in order to make sure that the quality doesn't suffer.
Yeah, I love that. It's balancing speed, quality, alignment. To hear you talk about the precision of getting the art right, picking up on the founder nuances and knowing your internal team so well.
Yeah.
I think that's the key to making a great external partnership work when it comes to hiring, because like you mentioned, and we've talked about, there's just so many ways to do it.
Yeah.
And we see those ads. I think a lot of recruiters see the make money quick or the kind of like Uber for recruiting platforms where it's a bill rate or a bounty or something like that. I think there are some folks that are really successful for that, but it comes down to figuring out what aligns with your values. What do you want to hang your hat on? How do you want to be known and the reputation?
Yeah. And kudos to them for their success. And it's hard work, right? It's hard work, not to like diminish their lack of effort. But I think the mistake is when people think they can do it easily, and they can just like quit their day job and just do this on the side and make $500,000.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I would not get into recruiting for the money. That's something that my 10 years have taught me.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of mentors that have helped me.
I still put him as my reference. The general manager of a Best Buy store I used to work with when I was a sales manager. He was the first person that really was like my mentor. He was like, I'll teach you all the business acumen, teach you how to like look at P&L. I'll teach you how to like hire people, how to exit people, how to fire people, how to performance manage people. And so he taught me a lot about this like business and people. And I was like in my early 20s, straight out of college, the economy took a dump. 2009 housing bubble, right?
Yeah.
And he believed in me, hired me from occasional seasonal, granted me full-time, then supervisor, then, really promoted me through the ranks. And so I would say he helped me along the way in terms of my early career. And when I made that pivot to recruiting, he fully understood, right, that I wanted out. I'll say Leslie from MuleSoft really helped me out. She's at Bain Capital Ventures. When I joined MuleSoft, it was early MuleSoft. I think we were like 700 people, pre-IPO. It was fun times. She was very authentic, very genuine, open door policy. But she just believed in me, ever since like interviewing me. Our interview was like 16 minutes long and when it's supposed to be 30 minutes. We just had really good conversations and she just like trusted everything that I pitched to her, which is really good. She just kind of let me run. So I helped build out the EPD recruiting function at MuleSoft, which is really fun. I think the last person that really helped me, I will say honestly, she took a chance on me. I cold outreach her, right?
It's awesome.
Never done an RPO before, never ran an RPO before, right? I've done agencies before, but the fact that she was like, hey, I don't know you, you don't know me. Here's the interview. I trust you with like one of this like really high stakes account at that time when I subbed in. And yeah, she just believed in me, trusted me, and then gave me full autonomy and still like believes in me in terms of like running the ship. And here we are.
It's awesome to hear, Alan. I think about like our generation of recruiters who we came into the job market post-Great Recession or around the Great Recession. And, you're a recruiting leader in this industry that I look up to and respect highly. Same with Annalie. Same with everybody that I talk to and come on the show. And I think one of the traits that I'm always fascinated by is got mad respect for folks that like get into HR at 22, or if they get a degree in HR, like go into recruiting.
Yeah.
I know a couple of people. I actually have two friends whose mothers were recruiters and they became recruiters early.
Okay.
However, hearing your journey from retail, my journey came from restaurants.
Chopping wood.
From chopping wood. Like legit, my first full-time job after school was running a saw and driving a forklift. Yeah. And then I was like outdoors and I went indoors to work in restaurants and like follow my passion because I love food. But yeah, like I talk to folks that have a very humble background. And I think that's so interesting, particularly in tech, because recruiting in HR can be like a low barrier to entry for a very lucrative career.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly never lose sight of those long days and late nights working in a restaurant or hiring in a restaurant or terminating people in a restaurant. And there's just a level of humble foundation that I really respect because we can get caught up in the economics of startups. Like we're in this beautiful co-working space, eating $20 salads in Soma.
You did.
I did, not Alan. Alan's starving. To think about the like journey that people have in their career, our time is so finite. So it's really cool to hear a little bit about how you've spent your career. I'm grateful for the time you've spent with me. I want to ask you, like, what are you seeing in San Francisco right now? You're working with a lot of tech startups. We're here in Soma. Is the city like alive and well? Are people coming back into office or is it more remote?
The city is coming back. A lot of our clients are asking for more people to come into the office. There's some general flexibility here and there, right? For example, if they're looking for like a staff or like an architect and just the market is too tapped out here, they might venture out to a more remote option or like a hub that they already have co-working space in. But for most of our requests, it's in office 3 to 4 days a week. Some of them are 5 days a week. Generally, candidates are okay with this. We haven't been getting a lot of pushback from candidates, unlike 2 years ago, I would say, when news were being brought up that there's an RTO policy, right? I don't think that was well received, but I think that has settled, and more candidates expect to come into office. Some actually want to. We hired someone for a client of ours. She started today. She said, I really want to go into office 3 days a week. It's just an in-office opportunity. Yeah, I think we're starting to make a comeback. And then in SF, it's making its way back. I think as the city is back.
Alan, thanks so much for coming on the show. This is awesome.
No, thanks for having me, Brandon. It's nice to finally meet you, the celebrity.
No way. How can people stay in touch with you?
So message me on LinkedIn. We chat on LinkedIn. Boulevard email address.
Yep.
In this podcast, so you can hit me up there.
And then what are the best companies that Boulevard works with in terms of like company size, stage, industry?
We work with like Series A to Series B. I would say size anywhere from 50 to 100. Go 150. Industry, we're mostly in like SaaS, health tech, AI approach, AI first type companies, mission-oriented companies. We're not really in robotics or hardware. Haven't really dabbled into there, but mostly I would say health tech, SaaS, e-commerce.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me out. It's great to see you in person.
Yeah, likewise. Finally meet you here in the present, IRL.
Here's a look at the next episode of the Recruiting Roadshow, brought to you by Greenhouse. I'm out in San Francisco about to interview Nicole Scarlato. Nicole has built companies like Lyft, Retool, and now she's a founding recruiter building the talent machine at Momentic. I'm excited to talk to Nicole because she has a really interesting background as a recruiter, and she's facing the same challenges that I've seen building companies from 0 to 1.
For 10 years, I basically drove tow trucks. I was guided towards that, even though I didn't want to do it. Especially being disabled, I'm a right leg amputee, and I had to work even harder to kind of make it work, right?
How do you think being an athlete and working in manual labor has shaped your outlook?
Not waiting for the perfect conditions, just getting your hands dirty and doing things because you had to.
What matters the most is, can you just hustle? Can you get stuff done? We earn that seat at the table by delivering great candidates.
It's not about what you say, it's about what you do to create cultures that are inclusive. I think saying it is one thing, but showing it is something else. And I think it's really important for authenticity to do that.